Mama, the revered 59-year-old chimpanzee matriarch of Royal Burger Zoo, hadn't touched her food in days. Once the energetic leader of her colony, she now lay listless, her once sharp eyes dulled by fatigue. The zoo staff watched with concern as their attempts to entice her with her favorite fruits remained fruitless. Her rapid decline was more than a physical ailment. It was as if she had lost her will to live. "Mama, please, try to eat something," urged her caretaker gently, holding out a piece of banana, but she barely glanced at it. Observing quietly, the younger chimpanzees mirrored the mood of their matriarch, their usual playful antics subdued. Mama had survived numerous challenges, diseases, conflicts within the colony, even the transition from the wild to captivity. Each time, her indomitable spirit saw her through, but this time, something was different. The staff whispered worriedly among themselves, pondering her decline. Was it merely old age, or something more profound? They recalled how she had been a cornerstone of primate behavior research, her intelligence and leadership qualities contributing to numerous studies. Yet now, as she lay withdrawing from the world, her legacy seemed poised to fade away, leaving behind a trail of unanswered questions and a zoo on the verge of losing its most iconic resident. As news of Mama's plight reached him, Jan van Hoof, now retired but ever passionate about his work with primates, felt a stirring of urgency. He had not visited the Royal Burger Zoo in some time, but the bond he shared with Mama was undiminished by the years. Determined, he packed a small bag and set out for Arnhem, driven by a mix of hope and apprehension. Throughout the drive, Jan's thoughts wandered back to the early days of the chimpanzee colony, to the time when Mama, then a young and vivacious chimp, first asserted herself as the leader. He remembered her intelligence, how quickly she learned and adapted, her crucial role in his studies on primate behavior. These memories brought a smile to his face, but his heart was heavy. Could his presence now, after all these years, make any difference to her? He thought of their first meeting, the way she had cautiously approached him, her deep, intelligent eyes sizing him up, the beginning of decades of friendship and mutual learning. As he drove, Jan talked aloud to himself, rehearsing what he might say to her, how he might once again connect with the chimpanzee who had taught him so much about patience, empathy, and the complex emotional lives of primates. Pulling into the zoo, Jan's sense of purpose grew stronger. He greeted old colleagues warmly, but wasted no time in heading to Mama's enclosure. "I'm here now, Mama. Let's see if we can't turn this around," he murmured to himself, a mixture of resolve and hope marking his words. The staff, recognizing the deep connection that had always existed between Jan and Mama, watched his approach with a mix of curiosity and tentative optimism. Could the return of her old friend spark a change in Mama's condition? Jan approached Mama's enclosure with a mix of eagerness and uncertainty. As he neared, he could see her frail form lying in the corner, barely moving except for the slow rise and fall of her chest. The vibrant leader he once knew now seemed just a shadow, her energy sapped by age and ailment. The sight struck Jan deeply, tightening his throat with emotion. "Mama!" he called softly, hoping to stir some recognition in her. The chimpanzee did not react, her eyes remaining closed, her face expressionless. Jan's heart sank. Had he arrived too late? He reached out slowly, placing his hand near hers, but careful not to startle her. "It's Jan, Mama. I've come to see you," he spoke again, his voice a soothing murmur in the quiet of the enclosure. The staff and other chimpanzees watched from a distance, their presence respectful and hushed. Time seemed to slow as they waited for any sign of recognition from Mama. Jan remembered the many times his voice had brought her solace and curiosity. Determined, he continued to speak, recounting anecdotes from their past, hoping familiar stories might reach her, spark a glimmer of the connection they once shared. His words floated in the air, filled with warmth and affection, but still, Mama remained still, unresponsive. The zookeepers exchanged concerned glances, their hopes dimming with each passing minute. Jan, however, was not ready to give up. He shifted closer, his face a portrait of determination and care. "Remember the summers we shared, Mama? The games, the laughter," he persisted, his voice now tinged with nostalgia. As Jan talked, he carefully watched for any change in her demeanor, any sign that the old Mama was still there, somewhere beneath the surface. The silence stretched on, only the soft sound of his voice and the distant calls of other animals in the zoo piercing the quiet. The question lingered in the air, heavy with emotion. Would Mama recognize her old friend after all these years? Amidst the silence, Jan, feeling a surge of inspiration, began to hum a melody that had often filled the air during his visits years ago, a simple tune that had always seemed to calm the chimpanzees. He hummed softly at first, then, with more confidence, the melody weaving through the enclosure like a gentle breeze. As the song filled the space, something subtle changed. Mama's ears twitched slightly, and her breathing altered rhythm, as if in response to the familiar sound. Encouraged, Jan continued, the notes flowing more freely from him now, his voice a soft but clear serenade in the quiet morning. The other chimpanzees seemed to sense the change, their movements pausing as they listened to the hauntingly familiar melody, a sound that spoke of safer, happier times. Then, almost imperceptibly at first, Mama's eyelids fluttered, a small but undeniable reaction. Her fingers moved, a slight twitch as if reaching out into the memory the song evoked. Jan's heart lifted, a flicker of hope ignited. He knelt closer, singing with gentle fervor, watching as Mama's eyes slowly, hesitantly, opened. For a moment, she looked lost, her gaze wandering uncertainly. But as Jan continued, her eyes started to focus, and they turned toward him. There was a flicker, a brief spark of recognition that seemed to fight through the fog of her frailty. The staff, watching from behind, held their breath, caught in the poignant scene unfolding before them. As he sang, the other chimpanzees drew nearer, their behavior influenced by the powerful display of emotional connection. As the final notes of the melody drifted away, Jan watched with a blend of relief and amazement as Mama's gaze solidified, her focus sharpening. The chimpanzee's response was slow, yet filled with intention. She reached out a trembling hand towards Jan, his fingers meeting hers through the enclosure mesh. The contact seemed to electrify them both, a tangible connection that transcended the years and the barriers between them. "You remember, don't you?" The simple act of touching hands revived memories of their time together. Mama's eyes remained locked on Jan, her gaze intense and penetrating. Her hand gripped his fingers more firmly, a strength flickering in her that hadn't been seen in days. The zoo staff observed this interaction with astonishment, witnessing the power of a bond that could reach through the haze of illness and the shadow of time. As Jan and Mama's hands remained connected, a subtle yet perceptible change seemed to infuse Mama with a newfound vitality. Observing this, one of the younger caretakers decided to make a closer inspection of the enclosure, motivated by the day's unexpected developments. What he found next added yet another layer of complexity to Mama's current state. Behind a loosely stacked pile of bedding materials, the caretaker uncovered a hidden stash of food. There were pieces of fruit and some biscuits, items that Mama had not seemed interested in for days, now hoarded away in a quiet corner. He called Jan over, pointing out the concealed cache with a mixture of surprise and intrigue. Jan approached, his curiosity piqued. "What have you got here, Mama?" he asked gently, his voice carrying a note of wonder. The discovery of the food stash was significant. It suggested that Mama's refusal to eat might not have been as straightforward as a lack of appetite or declining health alone. Perhaps there was an element of choice involved, a decision to withhold feeding herself despite the availability of food. The staff gathered around, discussing the implications of this find. It indicated a level of premeditation and resilience that none had expected in her weakened state. "She's been saving it, maybe for when she felt better, or perhaps—" Jan trailed off, the thought unfinished but hanging heavily in the air. This revelation provided a new perspective on Mama's behaviour. It wasn't just a surrender to illness. There was a strategy to her actions, a hidden strength that spoke to her enduring survival instincts. Jan knelt beside her, sharing the discovery with her in a hushed tone, as if acknowledging her foresight. "You've been planning, haven't you? Holding on for something," he mused aloud. The hidden stash was not merely a sign of physical resilience, but also of mental acuity, even in her diminished state. The staff, inspired by Mama's resilience, adjusted their care approach, incorporating gentle encouragement and respect for her apparent decision to engage with life on her terms. This adjustment in care rekindled a hopeful atmosphere around Mama's enclosure, as all present began to see her not just as a patient in decline, but as a being capable of making choices about her life and survival. The newfound understanding of Mama's condition inspired a more nuanced approach from the zoo staff. They started to offer her small amounts of her favourite foods from the hidden stash, encouraging her without overwhelming her. As Jan watched, he noticed a subtle but significant shift in her behaviour. Mama began to eat again, slowly and deliberately, as if rediscovering her appetite piece by piece. The change in Mama sparked a visible transformation within the entire chimpanzee colony. The younger chimpanzees, previously subdued by their matriarch's lethargy, now mirrored her revival with increased vigour and playfulness. Their sounds were brighter, their movements more energetic, as if they too felt the lift in spirits that the return of their leader's strength brought. "Mama's eating, look!" exclaimed a caretaker, pointing towards her as she picked up another piece of fruit. The staff gathered, sharing smiles and nods of approval, their earlier worries temporarily assuaged by this positive development. Jan stood beside them, his relief palpable. "It's more than just food. It's her will that's coming back," he observed, his voice tinged with admiration for the enduring spirit of his old friend. This revitalization of Mama had a ripple effect on the dynamics of the colony. Observing the interaction between the chimpanzees, Jan noted how their behaviour seemed to stabilize with Mama's recovery. They were more cohesive, the usual squabbles less frequent and less intense, their social structure reinforced by the reassertion of Mama's presence. The staff discussed the implications of these changes, considering how this could extend Mama's life and improve the quality of her days. "She's not just surviving, she's leading again," one of the researchers commented, watching as Mama gently corrected a younger chimp with a soft grunt, a sign of her re-engaged authority. Jan and the zookeepers contemplated the future with a cautious optimism. If Mama could maintain her health and spirit, she would continue to play a crucial role in the social and psychological welfare of the colony. Her ability to eat and interact was not just a boon for her own health, but a stabilizing influence on the entire group. As the sun set over the zoo, the enclosure calm and content, the staff left for the day with a renewed hope. Mama's recovery was a reminder of the resilience inherent in nature and the profound impact of emotional connections, both within and across species. In the weeks that followed, Mama's presence within the colony continued to be a source of inspiration and strength. However, nature's course is unyielding, and despite her brief resurgence, her age and health began to take their toll once more. This time, however, there was a profound sense of peace that permeated her decline. When the day came that Mama finally closed her eyes, her passing was as serene as a sunset, quiet and surrounded by those who loved and admired her. The entire colony seemed to sense the loss of their matriarch, their behaviour marked by a gentle solemnity. Jan, who had been a constant presence by her side, felt both a deep loss and a profound gratitude for the final weeks they had shared. "Goodbye, old friend," he whispered, his words a tender farewell imbued with the weight of decades of shared experiences and mutual respect. Recognizing the significance of Mama's life and her contribution not just to the colony but to the scientific community as well, the zoo decided to organize a celebration of her life. Researchers, zoo staff, and members of the community who had been touched by her story gathered to pay tribute. Pictures of Mama, from her youthful beginnings to her final days, adorned the space, each capturing moments of connection and discovery. John spoke at the event, his voice steady but filled with emotion. Mama was more than a subject of research. She was a leader, a teacher, and a friend. Her intelligence and empathy taught us so much about the depth of chimpanzee society and the emotional capabilities of primates, he shared, his words resonating with all who listened. Stories were shared by others too, anecdotes of Mama's antics, her challenges and triumphs, her role as a matriarch that shaped the fabric of the colony's social life. The event was not just a memorial, but a celebration of her legacy, which would continue to influence primate research and conservation efforts. The zoo announced the establishment of a fund in Mama's name, dedicated to the study and conservation of chimpanzees, ensuring that her impact would extend far beyond her physical presence. As the gathering concluded, the atmosphere was not one of despair, but of inspired reflection. The community left with a renewed commitment to understanding and protecting the creatures with whom we share our world. Mama's story, marked by resilience, intelligence, and emotional depth, had become a poignant reminder of the connections that transcend species, a legacy cherished and continued by those who had the privilege to know her. John lingered by the enclosure as the guests departed, looking at the space that Mama had once filled so fully. He felt a profound sense of peace, knowing that her legacy was secure, her life celebrated, and her story would continue to inspire and educate future generations. The memory of her, vibrant and strong, would forever be a beacon for those dedicated to the natural world.